The history of the three Japanese luxury car brands is a well-storied one. Honda has Acura, Nissan has Infiniti, and Toyota has Lexus. When these brands launched in the US in the 1980s, not only did they rather quickly steal considerable market share from the domestic luxury brands of Cadillac and Lincoln, they also provided significant challenge to foreign luxury brands, primarily the Germans. These three brands combined high-quality luxurious features with bulletproof Japanese efficiency and reliability, and even though each of them have gone through highs and lows over the years, some more than others, they prove that Japanese brands, pretty much solely known for building cheap, reliable econoboxes and cute little sports cars, could step onto the American luxury battleground and come out on top. Despite this, Mazda, usually seen as the fourth Japanese car brand, never got in on the fad, and they never had a luxury brand of their own. Or did they? In fact, for a few short years in the late 20th century, Mazda attempted to launch the fourth Japanese luxury brand on the American market. What exactly happened to Amati? The introduction of the Japanese luxury brands in the 1980s primarily concerned profit. Well, no duh. Specifically, it was all about higher profit margins. The Japanese had specialised in cheap, mass-market econoboxes since the mid-1970s, using the oil crisis as a springboard to mass import their cars and position themselves at the top of the pack. However, the American auto manufacturers, who were scrambling to update their ranges with half-hearted attempts to weather the storm, were very jealous types. Seeing these foreign car makers eating into their home market would simply not do. And so, in response, the American government began making moves to protect the domestic car brands, and in 1981 they came to an agreement with the Japanese government in which no more than 1.68 million cars could be exported to the United States each year. And so the Japanese brands had to look for alternative means to make a profit. With the new limits, solely importing cheap economy cars was no longer feasible. They needed something new. And so the Japanese brands would build factories on American soil to continue producing their cheaper offerings for the American market, while their exports from the Japanese factories would be reserved for something of a much higher profit margin. The Japanese luxury brands were born throughout the latter half of the 1980s, helped massively by the Japanese asset bubble that gave them huge amounts of capital to develop their new luxury ranges. Acura launched a massive success in the US market in 1986, and with the imminent launch of both Lexus and Infiniti in 1989, the three big Japanese brands were very suddenly imposing themselves on the luxury car market. Not only did these luxury outings diversify each brand's reach, it also allowed them to import higher margin vehicles to maintain profitability despite the American import restraints. Even though they were smaller than the big three, Mazda decided that they wanted their own luxury brand, and so in 1988, Project Pegasus was born. This was to be the start of Mazda's massive expansion plans, which included many other new brands such as Yunos, Infini, and Autozam, all three of those being for the domestic Japanese market. Project Pegasus was simply going to be another new name in the Mazda empire. If all went well, these efforts would position Mazda as the third largest Japanese auto manufacturer. This plan was helped along by the massive success of the MX-5 following its launch in 1989, in addition to the still strong Japanese economy. Mazda's first step for Project Pegasus was the development of new power plants, and they would showcase a 4-litre 3-bank W12 engine mock-up at the 1989 Tokyo Motor Show, though it wasn't really being touted for any particular model, more of a technological showcase. Initially, despite the massive plans, Project Pegasus was a big hush-hush, with Mazda largely denying that they were developing a new luxury brand at all. Mazda would, however, finally announce Project Pegasus, now renamed to Amati, publicly in 1991, with plans for it to go into production by 1994. However, other than the name and a few business details, little else was revealed. The intention was to build suspense and anticipation until release. What Amati was planning to do, therefore, remained unknown, and a lot remains unknown even to this day. So, with what we do know, let's get into the meat and potatoes. What was Amati going to put on the roads? Their first model was called the Amati 300, based on the executive class Yunos 500 from Mazda's other recently introduced brand. The larger Amati 500 was a rebadge of the Yunos 800. The Amati 500 had some interesting features, including 4-wheel steering and a supercharged 2.3 litre millicycle V6, millicycle being, in very loose terms, a special type of combustion engine with 2 power strokes used to offset certain performance deficits. However, being that most people have never heard of a millicycle engine, it's pretty obvious that it never really caught on. Okay, still with me? Finally, there was the Amati 1000, the company's flagship. However, contrary to popular belief, it was not to feature the W12 Mazda showcased at the 1989 Tokyo Motor Show. Instead, it would have been fitted with a specially developed V12, which was the combination of 2 K-series V6s. With up to 5 litres in displacement and early prototypes pushing around 280 horsepower, it would easily have been able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of the Lexus LS and the BMW 7 Series. Supposedly, there were even plans being developed to configure a version of the Mazda Cosmo to compete with the Lexus SC400, though this Amati Cosmo appears to be little more than rumours. Even so, it would seem that Amati had a pretty strong vision for a varied lineup quite early on, and despite press being largely unimpressed by the lack of tangible Amati announcements, there was promise for Mazda in the luxury segment. However, unfortunately, an insane amount of factors ended up playing against Amati in the end. Firstly were the Japanese and American operations. With Amati primarily being a brand orientated for the American market, the American Mazda team had a fair hand in deciding where the brand should go. But put simply, the two divisions did not see eye to eye, with the Japanese wanting a more hands-on approach, developing and testing prototypes early on and preparing for production, while the Americans were much more relaxed. In fact, they didn't really take the project seriously at all. These two contrasting approaches to the project hamstrung it from the start. Secondly was the market saturation. By the time Mazda planned to turn up to the American luxury market, it was already very saturated. There were obviously the legacy American luxury brands, then there was the German luxury brands, and then there were the previously introduced Japanese luxury brands as well, among others like Jaguar and Rolls-Royce. There were even luxury brands like Sterling that had tried to enter this market and had to leave due to diminished market share, with Sterling exiting the market a mere 2 weeks before Mazda announced Amati to the public. Simply put, they would have stood little chance of making an impact, not helped by the addition of luxury brand sales declining due to the effects of the Gulf War. And thirdly, and possibly most damning of all, was the asset bubble. The aforementioned asset bubble and the huge economy it would foster, which allowed the Japanese brands to develop their luxury branches in the first place, would burst in 1991, and soon after the Japanese economy would see a big downturn, leading to the lost decade. Mazda itself saw a huge decrease in capital and could no longer support all the new ranges they had introduced prior, and throughout the following years, Unos, Infini and Autozam would all shut their doors. They could stand to support new ventures even less, and so Amati would see the chopping block in October of 1992, despite Mazda having already pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into the project. Ironically, Ford, who owned one of Amati's would-be competitors, Lincoln, would increase their shares in Mazda massively in 1995, helping the brand to return to profitability. But what would Amati really look like if Mazda was able to fully commit to it? The other Japanese luxury brands all show a range of possible outcomes. Lexus is doing the best, consistently updating their range and introducing new models to respond to changes in the market, and sales reflect their expansion goals. Acura is just kind of treading water. Despite an equally strong start to Lexus, since the 2000s it's become less and less relevant. While they also introduce new models and updates fairly consistently, a lot of the time they just don't hit the mark and sales have slowly fallen. As for Infiniti, well, it's hard to honestly say that Infiniti has ever been relevant, and now they stand as a brand that had to withdraw from numerous markets around the world and only produces SUVs. To be honest, Amati could really have been any of these. Mazda itself has had a fairly rocky financial life in the last few decades, at one point being controlled by Ford, and it would be easy to see a universe where Amati did go into production, but Mazda was forced to slim down its range or outright kill it off to save capital. It's equally as likely that if Amati did come into existence, they would produce solely SUVs and crossovers these days, maybe with a sedan flagship to appease the older crowd. I think the most likely possibility was that Amati never found a foothold. They were going to launch years after their Japanese competitors, and their cars, like the 500 and the 1000, didn't really offer anything concretely new compared to their Japanese rivals. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise that Amati was never going to be able to hit the market, and that Mazda was able to reinvest capital elsewhere. Amatis did appear on the road in some sense, however. Both the 300 and the 500 were essentially finished cars, and so were hastily reconfigured for non-JDM markets to regain some investment. The Amati 300 would go on sale as the UNOS 500 in Australia and as the Mazda Z-DOS 6 in Europe, while the Amati 500 would go on sale as the UNOS 800 in Australia and as the Mazda Z-DOS 9 in Europe. All these numbers are so insanely confusing. The 500 would also go on sale in the US as the Mazda Millennia in 1994, the only Amati to be launched in its originally planned target market. It saw positive reviews at launch but never really took the market by storm, and when it was discontinued in 2002, the last breath of Amati went with it. The 1000 never saw the light of day, however it is rumoured that the second generation Mazda Sentia took a lot of design elements from the 1000, so perhaps Amati's flagship lived on for a while through that. Whatever your vision for it might have been, it's sad to see that Amati never got a chance at all. I feel like just how Mazda is the more alternative and individualistic Japanese mass market brand, Amati would have been the same for the luxury market. But just how so many things in history were never able to show off their true potential, Amati was killed off before its time. Thank you so much for watching, with a very special thanks to Brum Brum Bryn and Thomas Bradley, who are very generously donating at the highest tier on my Patreon. Just £1 a month is an amazing help, and I also have socials, links to those are in the description below. Again, thank you for watching, and take care.